So I'm here to tell you guys 3 key facts. First, that there is a crisis. Second, that it's worse than you realize. And third, that by being here today, you're now part of the movement to stop it. So as folks have said, there are a lot of facts about climate change and why it's scary and bad, and I'll probably share some of those facts with you today. But I want to start off with a story, which is a story that a couple of folks here have heard before, but for a lot of you I think will be news. Who here is familiar with the heat wave that hit Moscow in the summer of 2010? Raise your hand. So it wasn't all that well covered in the American media. But before the summer of 2010, Moscow had never seen a single day above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And during the summer of 2010, over a 2-week period, they broke that 100 degree Fahrenheit record no less than 8 times. Now the people of Moscow are not fortunate to live in a warm climate where they're used to such heat waves. So there weren't really any air conditioning units in Moscow. I like to joke that the best climate control they have in Moscow is vodka to stay warm in the winter. Thank you for the courtesy laugh. Yeah, so basically, if you're living in a place where it's really hot out and you don't have air conditioning, what do you do? Anybody? You open your windows and turn on the fans, right? Because like our world, your house is like a greenhouse. The heat comes in and gets trapped inside, so you want to open the windows to let the heat out. And you turn on the fans to blow that air out, right? The problem is that same heat wave caused the forests right next to Moscow to catch on fire. The forest started burning, and massive clouds of smoke started drifting over into the city of Moscow. All of the foreign embassies in Moscow, including the American embassy, closed down. They told their staff to leave the city until it was safer to come back. But a lot of people in Moscow didn't have that choice. Speaking of the justice angle, there are people there who don't have the ability to just drop everything and leave. They have jobs, they have families, they have responsibilities. Maybe they don't have the ability, maybe they can't afford to get out of the city. So most of the people of Moscow stayed in the city, and they were left with a choice. A choice of either opening their windows to let the slightly cooler 100-degree weather in with all the smoke, or to shut their window and to keep out the smoke but then bake in their 110-degree homes. And that's the choice that was presented to those folks. I want you guys to put yourselves in their shoes and think about what you would do. Would you open the window to let slightly cooler but smoky breeze into your home? Or would you shut the window and suffer with the hotter temperatures? Raise your hand if you open the window and let the smoke in. Raise your hand if you sweat with the higher temperatures. Raise your hand if you think that's an unfair choice. That's the right answer. It was an unfair choice. And over the course of that heat wave, 11,000... Dramatic pause. And we're back, all right. Over the course of that heat wave, 11,000 residents of Moscow paid for that choice with their lives. 11,000 people died of heat exhaustion or smoke inhalation during that heat wave. Across Russia, it was 55,000 people. These are the types of choices we are presenting people with: to suffer one way or to suffer a different way. The reason I like to point out this story is because it also points to the broader interconnection of our entire world here. Russia is traditionally the 3rd largest exporter of wheat in the world. And that same heat wave decimated Russia's wheat harvest, which meant that year, Vladimir Putin and his buddy Medvedev decided that Russia would no longer export wheat. Which, doesn't sound that big of a deal, right? The first 2 producers of wheat, the United States and Australia, both had good wheat harvests. So a lot of the commentators, the price will rise, but, it'll be fine. Which raises a lot of questions. First off, that it won't always be fine, that we can't guarantee that in the future, the United States and Australia won't have droughts or floods or heat waves the same year that Russia has in their next heat wave. But much more importantly, in this particular instance, there's an area of the world right by Russia that imports 50% of its food. Anyone know where that is? The Arab world. Lots of deserts there, right? In the Arab world, they don't grow a lot of food, not a lot of water. They have to import 50% of their food. This was 2010. In December of 2010, a young man in Tunisia who could not afford to feed his family lit himself on fire, sparking the Arab Spring. It was not coincidence that after decades upon decades of human rights abuses, government oppression, and dictatorships in the Arab world, that the Arab people in Syria, in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Libya, all decided to rise up and revolt and demand their rights. It was because a lot of them could no longer afford to feed their families. And when you can't feed your family, you're willing to take risks that you wouldn't take before. You get desperate. And people got desperate, and thank God they took to the streets and they blamed the dictator at the top, rightfully so. But history has shown that dictators are often pretty good about pointing the blame elsewhere, about creating scapegoats. People of different skin colors, different ethnicities, different sexual orientation, different religions. Those are the people who oftentimes bear the brunt of our problems when we have economic distress, which absolutely can be caused by environmental distress. Think of the Dust Bowl. The Great Depression was not just caused by the stock market. There are people who could no longer feed their families. Entire chunks of our population picked up and had to move. That's what we're looking at as we're looking ahead. And this heat wave that I'm talking about, with the 55,000 people dead in Russia, the tens of thousands, over 60,000 Syrians have now died from that civil war, and a lot of others have died across the Middle East. And certainly that's not the only factor. I don't want to denigrate that. There was obviously some very real and sincere desires for human rights and democracy in that part of the world. But again, those same desires were there the year before, and the year before, and the year before, and it was the economic pressures that led to that tipping point. And these economic pressures that we're talking about, that's with about a 0.8 degrees Celsius rise in temperature. Less than 1 degree Celsius. We're projected to have between 4 to 6 degrees Celsius, which is about up to 10 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the century, if we continue business as usual. This is a really serious crisis. The World Bank released a report talking about 4 degrees Celsius, the lower end of that range that we're headed towards. Again, this is the World Bank, not Greenpeace. A very independent institution has no skin in the game on saying we are willing to charge forward on tackling climate change. And they found, with 4 degrees Celsius, that, quote, adaptation may not be possible to a 4 degrees Celsius world. The World Bank is calling into question whether or not civilization as we know it would survive a rise in temperature of 4 degrees Celsius. There are very few climate models out there that try to project what a given temperature rise will mean to human populations. No one who could have predicted with a climate model that 55,000 Russians would have died in that heat wave, and that 60,000 Syrians would have died in the civil war many months later because of the food pressures, the food price pressures. Those climate modeling just don't get us that far. Very few scientists have the courage to project out what a given change in the atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide will lead to. A given temperature change will then lead to these disasters and lead to these changes in human population. But there are a couple of scientists who have taken a look and tried to give their best estimate. There's a group of scientists from the Rotterdam Institute, led by a scientist who's now currently the top climate advisor to the German government. Again, a very, very well-respected international scientist who's now at the top of Europe's most powerful country and advising their chancellor. He found with a 5 degrees Celsius rise in temperature, their projections were that the carrying capacity of this planet, the amount of food and water available for human beings to consume, would be for about 1 billion people at 5 degrees Celsius. 1 billion people. Current population projections have us going to 9 billion people by 2050. I'll let you all do the math there, but it's not pretty. 6 degrees Celsius. I haven't heard too many studies that project what 6 degrees Celsius will look like, but I want you to look up to the sky right now and try to think about where a mile above us is. 6 degrees Celsius in the opposite direction had the top of ice being 1 mile above us right now. The last ice age was only 6 degrees Celsius in the opposite direction, and there was a mile of ice above where you are standing right now. All of New England was covered by a mile of ice with 6 degrees Celsius in the other direction. Think about that for a second, what a mile of ice above us right now would look like, and how different that world is. We're talking about going 6 degrees in the other direction. That's how dramatic a difference we're talking about. If you think about the human body, 98.6 degrees is a very sweet spot. You don't want to mess with that. If you go up a couple degrees, or 5 or 10 degrees, you're looking into some really serious trouble. The planet is no different. That balance is the reason we have agriculture. Agriculture was only developed within the past 10,000 years, since the last ice age, when we've had a very, very stable fluctuation, never varying more than a single degree in either direction Fahrenheit. We're talking about going over 10 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of this century. A very different world, a world that you don't want to live in, and a world that is not fair for any of us to make a single other human being live in. And talking about those justice dimensions, the people who are suffering right now from this, the people who are going to die, the people who have already died, by and large, haven't burned a drop of fossil fuels in their life. They have not gotten an ounce of benefit from the destruction that is coming their way, that has come their way, that's going to condemn future generations for as far out as you want to project to live in a scary and unfair world. None of them are getting the benefits. It's selfish of us to say that we deserve everything that we want because we're too damn lazy to change. It's selfish for the Board of Trustees of Tufts to say, we're going to eke out every last penny from the fossil fuel industry so we can pay our top executives more of whatever the hell they want to spend the money on. It's not fair for the people who are dying, who are paying for this with their lives, when they're not getting any of the benefits. So as I said, it's looking really, really bad. The good thing is that this movement is building. I've been working with students at Tufts since the fall of 2007. I can tell you this is the largest rally I've seen at Tufts campus to date. And there are rallies like this happening all across the state, all across the country. We are building this movement. We just had 50,000 people in Washington, D.C. And we have 4 wonderful, brave heroes here today, one of which is going to talk soon about some courageous actions that they've taken. There are more courageous actions on the way. I can tell you for sure, this movement is building like nothing else. It's on rocket fire. You all want to be part of it. You're here. You're part of it. Tufts is going to divest because you will not stop until they do. So let's march forth and win this thing.